I just want to say welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. My name is Fotini Tellu and I work as a research associate at the Wolfson Center for Young People's Mental Health. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's lecture, which is part of our public lecture series. This is the first one for 2026, with the second one taking place in spring. So the lecture is being recorded and it will be posted on the Wilson Center YouTube page, where you'll also be able to see any other talks in the series that you may have missed. The session is scheduled for an hour with questions and discussion being encouraged. So if you have any questions, you can share them via the Q&A button, as you'll see at the top of your screen. Our speaker today is Neil Humphrey, who's a professor of psychology education at the Manchester Institute of Education at the University of Manchester. He also serves as Associate Dean for the Faculty of Humanities. Neil's research focuses on social and emotional learning, mental health, educational settings, and special education needs. Currently, Neil leads a BWell study, a large-scale initiative that gathers evidence on young people's well-being throughout an annual school-based survey across multiple regions in England. Today's talk will focus specifically on key research insights generated through the BWell program, including patterns in well-being and inequality, alongside with practical examples of impact. And the talk will conclude by exploring the implications for educational policy, especially around monitoring and assessing young people's mental health. So over to you, Neil.
Okay, thanks, Fatima, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's great to see so many people on this call. So I've got some slides that I'm going to share, so just bear with me 1 second. Okay, so so I'm going to talk to this is I'll give you a kind of general overview of the BWell program, how we started, what we've done, some of the key research insights, as Fatima said, and some of the impacts and where we think we're going with it. The first thing to say, well, two things really on this title slide. The first is our strapline, if you like, which is making young people's well-being everybody's business. That's really kind of summarizes what's at the heart of our mission in the BWell program. It's wanting to ensure that all of the people who have a kind of a stake or a role to play in young people's well-being are able to do so, and that it's not just left for schools or left for any one particular sector or set of professionals, that this is something that is for everybody. And then the second thing to flag from, excuse me, I was at the football last night and I'm a little bit hoarse because I was shouting quite a lot. The second thing to say is the BWell website, bwellprogram.org, has a treasure trove of information about the program, including some of the interactive data dashboards that we use, as well as like the papers that we publish and a whole host of other things. So I strongly encourage you to go and explore the BWell website after the webinar whenever you're able to. I can only scratch the surface of some of the stuff that we've done. So BWell, the final thing to say before I actually start properly is BWell is very much a program that's been developed with young people. I'll say a little bit more about that in detail a little later on, but everything that you see, including the visual identity, so that the kind of the slide set that I'm presenting on today, the backgrounds and the images, the logo for the program, the name of the program, all developed and designed in consultation with young people. So the visual identity and the logo of the program were designed by a young person who's a keen kind of graphic designer, and that's central to everything that we do. We do things with young people rather than to young people. So BWell itself is a wellbeing program founded three or four main organisations back in about 2021. The university where I work, University of Manchester, Anna Freud, who are one of the largest children's mental health charities in the country, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. So in Greater Manchester, the kind of city region, 10 different local authorities, and we have this umbrella organisation, the Combined Authority, and Andy Burnham, obviously our mayor. And then also the Gregson Family Foundation. So there's a chap called David Gregson, who is an alumnus of the University of Manchester and a philanthropist. And back in about summer of 2019, our then president, Dame Nancy Rothwell, put him in touch with me because we shared interest and concern about the state of young people's mental health and well-being in the UK. And that meeting over lunch proved quite fateful in terms of then working together to start to design what would become the Be Well program. And we're kind of about three things really. The kind of core element is, we have academic expertise at the university, myself and colleagues, combined with youth-led change. So as I said, everything that we do with young people. I'll give you some practical examples of that. We have the backbone of the program is an annual co-created survey. So we ask young people about different things to do with their well-being, but also the things that young people have told us are drivers of their well-being. So we've asked young people, well, what are the things that affect your well-being in secondary schools all across Greater Manchester? So we started in Greater Manchester in 2021. And then in 2023, we went to a second location, which is the Hampshire, Isle of Wight, Portsmouth and Southampton integrated care system area. So throughout the session, you'll hear me making reference to HIPS, and HIPS basically just stands for Hampshire, Isle of Wight, Portsmouth and Southampton. It's less of a mouthful than saying all of those four places together. And in Be Well, we're kind of committed to listening to young people's voices, acting together for change, and celebrating young people's well-being. So while we are, while we were founded because of a concern about the state of young people's mental health and well-being, this isn't a kind of a deficit-based program. We're very much about celebrating what's going well and learning from what's going well as much as we are about finding out where things are going wrong and how they can be improved. So just a few kind of key factor, a kind of a bit of a general overview. I wanted to draw your attention first to the GIF on the left-hand side of the screen from Wallace and Gromit, and I can never remember whether it's Wallace or Gromit, the dog. But anyway, the kind of laying the track as the train is running, that very much epitomizes what the experience has been of working on Be Well since 2021. The program has expanded massively, not just in terms of our geographical reach, but the ambition and the kind of even the team. So when we started in 2021, there was basically just three of us. There was myself, David Gregson, who I mentioned, and then a chap called Hugh Spencer, who was working at the Combined Authority at the time, and it was three of us in a room. And if we roll forward to now, in 2026, we have a whole team at the Anna Freud Centre. We have a whole team in Greater Manchester Combined Authority, a whole team in HIPS, a big research team, postdocs. There's about 5 or 6 postdocs across ourselves and the Anna Freud Centre, about 7 or 8 PhD students, 2 data managers, a national director, James Robertson, a whole team of project managers and administrators and so on. So it's grown exponentially and very rapidly. And in terms of that survey that I mentioned, so we've now surveyed just under 200,000, about 190,000 young people have been surveyed at least once. And I always try and kind of put some context to the number whenever I do this. So this is like the latest update since we did our last survey in the autumn. So 190,000 young people that have been surveyed at least once. Some of them have been surveyed more than once because we have at any one point in time, we're tracking a longitudinal cohort, but 190,000 that have surveyed at least once. So if you've ever visited Manchester in any of our sporting and music venues, that's enough to fill Old Trafford Football Ground, the Etihad football ground, Co-op Live, which is the largest indoor arena in the UK, the Manchester Arena, which used to be the largest indoor arena in the UK, the O2 Apollo, the O2 Victoria Warehouse, Albert Hall, and the Manchester Academy. So we could fill all of those big venues and actually still have a couple of thousand left over. So it's a very, very large number of young people that have taken part. And at any one point in time, so when we do our survey each autumn, it varies slightly from year to year, but typically we have over 50% of the adolescent population in eligible year groups. So, of the kids that are the right age that we're surveying that year, we get more than half of the population in the city region. So we have very wide reach. We've worked with about 320 schools across our two regions, 14 different local authorities, so 10 in Greater Manchester and 4 in Hips. We work with, really importantly, we work very closely with the local authorities and the schools. And one of the key things that does, other than promoting engagement, is we have data sharing agreements, for example, with the local authorities that enable us to link socio-demographic background information about our young people that complete our surveys. Local authorities don't hold all of that. So, for example, we work with a lot of independent schools, and local authorities don't hold independent school data. So, in those instances, we do data sharing agreements with the schools as well. And then we've had, outside of what we deliver, we've got various kind of, what we've referred to as like side hustles, where we've worked with third party organisations, including the Kylo Project and various others, that deliver something that looks a little bit like Be Well or inspired by Be Well. And that at last count was about 56 schools and another kind of 11 or so thousand pupils, but that number's kind of probably a bit out of date now. In terms of what we actually ask young people, you'll be able to see on the slide the kind of green box. It splits into two areas. So this again is all based on what young people have told us is important to them. Different areas and domains of well-being, anything from young people's emotional experiences, their positive and negative emotional experiences, their mental health, their sense of meaning, purpose, and control in life. So things like life satisfaction and optimism, different kind of elements of them understanding themselves. So, stress, emotional regulation, etc. And then a whole range of different influences on well-being, anything from health and routine, so how much exercise they get, how much sleep they get, their experiences in and out of school, what they do in their free time, how they feel about their future, their relationships, what kind of support that they've had for their well-being, all of these different things, and things about their local neighbourhood and their local area as well. And all of these different things are in there because young people have told us that they're important drivers of their mental health. So we gather data on that, and then our kind of key aim is to put those data to work. So we have interactive data dashboards. There's a public dashboard which I'll show you a couple of screen grabs of. We have private dashboards for schools, so all the schools that take part get private dashboards every year that Lawrence, our data manager, has designed from scratch that they can use to kind of interrogate different patterns and trends between different groups of pupils and over time and so on. We never because we promise young people confidentiality, so it's not a screening dashboard. They don't get down to the level of the individual young person. It's much more at the kind of aggregated level, but they can still drill down into the data for different patterns and different groups of young people. We produce a ton of different themed analyses. So we produce briefings several times a year. We have a main kind of headline set of reports which come out actually in the next few weeks. Those will be coming out based on the data that we collected before Christmas. But we also kind of do themed analyses around particular issues. We've done stuff around the well-being of young people with special needs, for example. We've done stuff around young people's relationships, you name it, we've done it. And then we also have different kinds of events and things throughout the year. So the idea is basically all of those data, putting it to work in as many different ways as possible, and working with the schools themselves, but also working with local communities, working with local authorities, and a whole range of different project partners. So Be Well has somewhere in the region of, I think it might be getting on for 200 now, partner organizations, and they range from some very kind of hyper local small voluntary community sector organizations right up to kind of very big national charities. And these are all organizations who have committed to acting on the data that we produce. And that those data that we produce, the idea is that those are turned into actionable insights. So it's about building an evidence base to inform decision making and provision across the system. And one of the reasons that I think we've been, pretty successful in terms of engaging young people and engaging schools, other than having put in the legwork to actually ask young people what's important to them, is though that we were making this information available. So there was a clear need for this in this space. So most people that work in or around schools or with young people will say to you that they know that there's a need in the population, but like they don't have access to the right information, the right data. They don't have access to an evidence base, and this is what we give them. We put the data at their fingertips. So I mentioned that we work directly with young people. We try and use the Lundy model. If colleagues are familiar with the Lundy model, we try and use that wherever we can. So that's about giving space for young people. It's giving a voice for them to voice their concerns and their aspirations. It's about connecting them sometimes with the right audience. A good example of that is we did a piece of work with the Politics Project a few years ago, where we were able to use some of our funding to connect some of our young people with some of their local elected officials. So basically getting them in a room, and then the young people were able to talk through what some of the Be Well data is showing and produce an ask of their elected officials, in terms of kind of policy, so, okay, you're the councillor for my local area. This is what our data is showing about the mental health of young people in this area, or, the availability of different facilities in the local area for young people. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to earn your wages as our local councillor? So being able to connect young people with audience and giving them influence as well. So being able to kind of set up those kinds of situations where young people's views are actually heard, not in a tokenistic way, but in a way that actually makes a difference on the ground. More formally, we have co-creation leads. So we have we did have one in Greater Manchester. It's in the process of changing over at the moment, and one in our Hampshire Be Well teams, so that ensures that young people are at the centre of everything that we do. We have a youth steering group who advocate on behalf of young people, make sure their interests are central to all the activities and steer our response to the data. So as a good example, I mentioned our headline reports, which will be coming out in the next few weeks based on our last survey data. Every year when we do the headline reports, you can imagine with all the different things that we survey, like how do we pick and choose what it is that we're going to focus on in the headline reports? Well, the answer is we go and ask young people, we showcase the data with them, and then young people help us determine, what are the kind of important key findings this year from the perspective of young people. Our youth steering group also commissioned, have done some commissions. So we have bits of budget that we set aside, and they've commissioned projects, including a neighbourhood project to support community belonging, various different things like that. We've got a young researchers program. So this is a bit of a citizen science type program. And in fact, last week, that takes place annually. We have young people in year 10 who we work with to basically, it's about learning about research and learning about research specifically on wellbeing and mental health. We used to do that online, so that used to be done on Teams, and we would have anywhere up to kind of 20-25 young people from different schools across Greater Manchester participating in that program at this time of year. We're now doing it face to face, so we hosted them on campus last week. We have all kinds of other examples there that we'll mention, but the key thing that I always want to draw people's attention to, which is part of that citizen science program, is our data visualization laboratory at the university. So that those images across the bottom, on the bottom left there, you can see this is from last year, our young people in the data viz lab. So this is in this country pretty much a one-of-a-kind facility that we have in our business school. So this is a big wraparound 3D data visualization kind of imaging facility. We have a digital twin of the Greater Manchester City region, and we can overlay the data from the Be Well data set onto a map of Greater Manchester, and then young people can kind of explore it in 3D, and they're essentially hovering over the city region, and they can zoom in on their neighbourhood, and it's absolutely fantastic. And in terms of being able to capture the imagination of young people and show them just how powerful and how exciting data can be, it's a one of a kind. It's absolutely brilliant, and it's powered by if anybody is a gamer, it's powered by the Unity game engine, so it's really, really cool stuff. Okay, so we survey, but it's surveys plural. So these are the different surveys that we've developed. The main one, so we have one for each region, because the feedback that we had in Greater Manchester versus the feedback that we had in the Hips region, young people are young people wherever you find them. So there's a lot of overlap. So the surveys are about probably 70% harmonised, but then there are local priorities in Hips that are not necessarily reflected in Greater Manchester, and vice versa. So we have one for Manchester, one for Greater Manchester, and one for the Hips region. But we also, though, have different versions for young people who might be educated outside of mainstream education. So we have, and we didn't want to restrict what we do just to young people in kind of typical mainstream settings. So we have a shorter version of the Be Well survey, which is used mainly for young people in special school settings, that again was co-produced with young people in those settings and with the staff who support them to try and better understand, well, if we always give them the choice, right? So there's always the choice to do the full survey, but if they wanted to do a shorter version, what would be the different things that are the most important to carry across? And then from the point of view of working with staff, what are the adaptations that we might need to make to the survey to make it more accessible for those young people? And then we even have a symbol version, a very short version of the survey that's just 10 items, uses widget symbols. If anybody's worked in a school for young people with profound and multiple disabilities, widget symbols are a way of communicating with young people who might not be able to access typical modes of communication. So we've been able to reach about, I think it's now about 700 young people over the last sort of 4 or 5 years with the Be Well symbol survey. And if you think to kind of other projects of this nature, those are young people whose views are typically just not heard because they're not able to access the kind of standard survey. So we wanted to make this as inclusive as we possibly could. We don't always get it right, though. So we had there's on the right hand side there. We piloted last year an elective home education survey. So about 1.5% of all young people in the UK are educated at home for all kinds of different reasons, and we wanted to make sure that we could hear their voice as well. So we worked on a survey for those young people, and this is one that we definitely didn't get right. We didn't get a good enough response rate. We're careful never to kind of, it's not about these young people being hard to reach. It's about us not finding the appropriate way to reach them. So we're kind of reconsidering at the moment how we might better engage with families and young people who, for all kinds of understandable reasons, have a difficult and challenging relationship with education and with their local authority and so on. So, we still want to hear their voices, but we've just not found the right way of doing that yet. And then finally, we also have a school provision survey, which we piloted in 2024. We're probably going to run it again this year, which is more about at the school level, what are the different things that are being done within a given school. It has 3 modules. So we have a mental health and wellbeing module, we have a kind of arts and creativity module, and then we have a sports and physical activity module, because our consultation with schools and young people, those were the kind of 3 kind of key areas where we thought it'd be useful to get information about what schools were doing to support their young people's wellbeing. So lots and lots of data collected in various different forms. So I mentioned the dashboard. These are just some screenshots. So this is from our public, we have a public dashboard, which is neighborhood based. So you can see there, let me just go through that. There we go. You can see there the kind of the larger image, that's a heat map of Greater Manchester. So each of those geographical units is a neighbourhood in Greater Manchester. So there's about 66-ish. They keep changing the boundaries, so we keep having to rewrite our map. But there's about 65, 66. They're called neighbourhoods. It's a common uh, geographical unit that's used by police and health and various other agencies. But as you can probably guess, they're actually not neighbourhoods in the way that we might understand them. So when I think about my neighbourhood, so I'm sat at home at the moment, my neighbourhood, I think about it's like our local village. I'm out on the kind of I'm about here on the map. And what I feel is my neighbourhood is a tiny, tiny area that's nowhere near as big as the actual GM neighbourhood I belong to. But it's an administrative geographical unit that's used by multiple agencies in Greater Manchester. So it made sense for us to present the data in this particular way. It's a heat map, so and people can access all the different things that we measure. There's different metrics that we use. They can filter by age, gender, free school meal eligibility, special needs, and different combinations. We have sometimes people are just interested in a particular neighbourhood, so we have a neighbourhood profiles tool, so they can select one of those 60 plus neighbourhoods and get all the information for that neighbourhood in one place. Including kind of neighbourhood level contextual characteristics. So not just the data that we collect, but things like, for example, things like the crime risk score from the index of multiple deprivation, how many sports facilities there are for young people, etc., etc. So all kinds of really useful information. At the local authority level, so Greater Manchester is made up of 10 different local authorities. I'm out here, as I said, so this is Oldham, which is where I am, Rochdale, Bolton, Bury, Wigan, Salford, Trafford, Stockport, Tameside, Manchester in the middle. The reason that that's grey right in the middle there is the data suppresses if the response rate is too low, and that's absolutely dead centre in Manchester, and it's because basically very, very, very few young people live there because it's all young professionals who don't have children yet that living in the kind of cool apartments and things like that. So we have these data dashboards. Schools get their own private dashboards. Once a school has taken part for more than 1 year, and as I mentioned, we're always tracking at least one cohort of young people, we can start to provide longitudinal data, but we also have serial cross-sectional data. So we have repeat surveys of particular year groups, and again that gives us all kinds of useful insights that we can start to look at. So we can say, is the well-being of a particular cohort improving as we track them through school, or is it getting worse, etc. But also, just as a general kind of a thing, is the well-being of the population improving year on year? So if we look at year 10 kids every year, do we see any trends over time, and so on? And then we also do bespoke data cuts because there's only so much information that we can provide in our dashboard without it becoming overwhelming. And in fact, some of the feedback that we get already is that it's quite overwhelming. So there's a lot of information that we kind of have to hold back. But then organizations, we have a data cut request form, and organizations can request a data cut for something that's not available on the dashboard, and local authorities and others, they use it for things like joint strategic needs assessment and various other things like that. So the data is kind of woven into the fabric of the city region and the HIPS region that we're now working with. So in terms of research, so these data exist for lots of different purposes. There's the very practical purpose, which I'll come back to, which is around impact and impact in practice and policy and so on. But obviously, as you can imagine, as well as a researcher, a key attraction for us is the ability to use these data to produce new insights. So I thought I'd just take you through a few of the kind of key themes, if you like, of the things that we've been doing, just to give you a sense of how we've used the data, but also the opportunities to link the data to other sources and so on. So we've had one of our kind of themes has been called a place to be well, and this is about because we have the data and we can organize it geographically, because for the young people who complete our survey, one of the data items that we hold through our data sharing agreements is their residential postcode, which means we can place them somewhere in the city region. And that then means we can connect data up to neighborhood data and look at how neighborhoods differences between neighborhoods, characteristics of neighborhoods, how they correlate and influence young people's well-being. So we did a paper that came out a couple of years ago that looked at how socioeconomic deprivation drives young people's life satisfaction trajectories over time, and how this relationship mediated by kind of housing and environment factors in different neighborhoods. So where there are neighborhoods where there are kind of, substandard housing or overcrowded housing, we are able to kind of see how that plays out in terms of changes in young people's life satisfaction as they get older. All of these papers, by the way, are hyperlinked. So I'll send Fatini or Margarita, I'll send you the PowerPoint slide, and then you're welcome to share it with colleagues. And then each of these, there's a hyperlink, and it should take you to directly to the paper. If it doesn't, you'll be able to find it on the BWell website. This is all published work. The second theme we call Proud to Be Well, or Be Proud. This has been about looking at inequalities in well-being for young people who identify as LGBTQ+. We've done quite a lot of work on well-being disparities since we started, and we've ended up looking at it by socioeconomic deprivation, by special educational needs, etc., etc., and consistently, these are the young people who are, the most stark inequalities that we see in our data are between our LGBTQ plus young people community and their cisgender heterosexual peers. So we've done quite a lot of work in this space. One key example being looking at how different kind of minority stressors, things like bullying, gender discrimination, etc., how those drive later well-being outcomes. In the case of the paper that we wrote, it was for trans and gender diverse young people. So there's a lot of work around that particular issue, and obviously that's a very current issue at the moment and something that's been quite controversial over the last couple of years, the kind of identity politics side of things. Third theme is what we call Spaces to Be Well. So Spaces stands for Supporting Participation in Arts, Culture, Entertainment and Sport. And this is really just about looking at how young people's engagement in those kind of out of school activities, what they're doing in their free time, and how that might improve their well-being. So we've done work looking at different patterns of everyday participation and how we can characterize that. So we did latent class analysis looking at different kind of patterns of participation across a range of activities, and then the extent to which that then could be shown to influence well-being 1 year later. Got a PhD student at the moment, a brilliant PhD student called Sam Hugh Jones, who I'm co-supervising with colleagues in our School of Health Sciences, who's looking at the kind of the health economics, if you like, of the relationship between arts and creativity and young people's mental health. So a lot of work in that space as well. Because we work with schools, as you would imagine, there's a lot of work that we do which is looking at young people's experiences and relationship with school and how that influences their well-being, but also how their well-being influences what goes on in school. So we've done some work using a developmental cascades framework to examine how young people's mental health, their sense of school belonging, their relationships with staff, and their attendance. So again, this is a good example of where we've been able to create new insights through data linkage. So for our Greater Manchester cohort, we're able to link the 3 years of data for our longitudinal cohort to 3 years worth of data on attendance that's collected by schools, to start to look at the kind of the bi-directional relationships that are there between young people's mental health and their attendance and school belonging and so on. And some of the key insights we've been able to find have been around, for example, how young people's mental health, when that deteriorates, how that can impact their attendance, but then also how things like relationships with staff can actually create positive change for young people. We've also done a lot of work on mapping trajectories of school attendance and their drivers. So obviously attendance is a really key issue in education at the moment, in the post-pandemic kind of era, where we know there are far too many young people who are not attending school enough. We need to know more about what the barriers are there. So we've been doing lots of work with kind of latent growth mixture modeling to try and identify, you can see in the graphic there, these are data on young people's attendance through year 8, year 9 and year 10, each of the different terms. And our analysis showed, while most young people belong to that kind of upper trajectory, which, these are young people who are attending school almost all the time, we also identified two distinct trajectories. One of young people whose attendance got progressively worse and dipped off, particularly in year 10, and another one whose attendance was declining, but then, kind of exhibited some kind of recovery into year 10, and then starting to try and understand through our linked data what are the factors that actually put young people on one of those three different paths. And some of them are mental health related, some of them are peer group related, some of them are to do with bullying and experiences at school and so on. So it's really kind of rich insights that we're able to get through the kind of linkage of data, and then also work on exclusionary disciplines, so things like internal exclusion, or what's kind of colloquially known as consequence booths or reset rooms or restart rooms. That idea of removing young people from the class when they're disruptive and putting them in a separate room, all the way through to formal suspension from school. We've just done a paper looking at what predicts young people's suspension from school, again linking the survey data to suspensions data that's been shared by local authorities. And then finally, a few other bits and pieces. Quite a lot of work on, so we call it Move to Be Well, which is looking at the relationship between young people's physical activity and their kind of health behaviours more broadly. So things like their nutrition and sleep and so on, and their well-being. So we worked with an economist from the DFE, Kitty, who has been fantastic and has been helping us work out and understand the economic value of sports participation and physical activity based on its relationship to well-being. One other thing that we've done, which we've called Support to Be Well, is using our data set. So if you imagine we've got data on tens of thousands of young people, one thing that's enabled us to do is work with lots of intervention providers who typically, so Football Beyond Borders is a good example, but we've also worked with Free to Be, we've worked with Factory International, we worked with about 5 or 6 different organisations. And the typical scenario is they have data, quite often using similar measures to the ones that we use in the Be Well data set. They have data on the changes in well-being for young people who participate in their programs, but they don't have any kind of form of comparison. So they kind of, they have a sense that what they're doing is making a difference to young people's mental health, but they really don't have a robust framework to kind of say for sure. So what we do is we then are able to use the Be Well data set to kind of provide synthetic so we use things like propensity score matching and difference in differences estimation to be able to provide a robust independent estimate of the impact of these different interventions. So as a good example, we published a paper, so Football Beyond Borders, they work with young people in schools, at-risk young people, it's a kind of combination of physical activity on the football pitch combined with social emotional learning in a classroom combined with building a relationship with a trusted adult. Those are the kind of 3 ingredients of that program, and we were able to kind of analyze their data in conjunction with our own to show that program was actually having a really positive, robust effect on young people's well-being. And then our partners at Pro Bono Economics, who do all the kind of the kind of economic analysis looking at social return on investment. So based on what the program costs to run and what the wellbeing benefits are, they're able to kind of say, for every pound that you put into a program like this, you can recoup this much in monetized wellbeing benefits. So that's a kind of a general overview. There's other stuff that we've done that doesn't quite fit into any of those boxes. So we published a paper recently, which got quite a lot of press, which was about a longitudinal analysis of young people's social media use, their gaming and their mental health. It got a lot of press because we actually found, counter to the kind of popular narrative, we actually found that changes in young people's social media use didn't predict changes in their mental health. So that kind of went against the grain somewhat in terms of the kind of widespread narrative of universal harm of young people's social media use. So just to finish, and sorry, new emergent stuff. I'll run through this really quickly because I'm aware that I'm kind of running out of time. We're doing some work on colleagues might be aware of this kind of notion of benevolent childhood experiences or positive childhood experience. Basically, If you've seen all the work on ACEs, on adverse childhood experiences, this is a kind of direct counterpoint to that. And it's about looking at, obviously we can't dismiss adverse childhood experiences, but it's also sort of looking at, well, what can we learn from examining when young people have access to kind of positive resources in their lives. That can help us understand, how to kind of intervene better. So we've got a data set. So Steph, who's one of our postdocs, has a paper under review at the moment. We've got data from it's about 100 or so thousand young people because it was done prior to our last survey, but looking at different positive, benevolent childhood experiences, how prevalent they are, what the inequalities are between different groups, and so on. Stuff about substance use, stuff about suspension that I mentioned, all kinds of stuff. In the longer term, so at the moment, the Be Well data set, we host it at the University of Manchester. We do bits and pieces of collaborative work with colleagues at other universities and other research teams. In the longer run, we're looking to archive the data, probably, not certainly, but probably with the UK longitudinal linkage collaboration. We're in the process of trying to organise that at the moment. That's not certain yet, but what that will enable us to do in the longer term is it's a place for a de-identified copy of the data set to be hosted so that the wider research community can access it, but it can also be linked to data, for example, from the National Pupil Database, and also health data, things like mental health services data set and community services data set. Quick final thing then around impact, just to give you a sense of the things that this has informed on the ground. We've had all kinds of, there's stuff at the school level. If you go onto our website, the impact section of our website, there's some really nice case studies of how individual schools have used the data that's generated through the surveys, all the way up to, at the local authority or even the pan local authority level. Our data informs the Greater Manchester strategy. Stockport local authority have used it for their joint strategic needs assessment. Wigan have used it for their strategic alliance plan. There's a Greater Manchester Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Outcomes Framework, which is informed directly by the data that we gather from young people with special needs. We've had physical activity campaigns for targeting young people in the city region based on what our data was telling us about young people's physical activity. Football Beyond Borders that I mentioned have been able to use the evidence that we were able to generate to scale up their work, including being the delivery partner for Building Futures. And then the final thing, which I was going to land on, is this campaign for national wellbeing measurement. So we had the Our Wellbeing, Our Voice campaign, which was led by ourselves and Pro Bono Economics and a few other organisations, including the Fair Education Alliance and Children's Society, that was basically trying to lobby the government via the Children and Schools Wellbeing Bill. So Munira Wolfson, who's an MP down south in, I think, Richmond, tabled an amendment proposing a kind of an amendment to the Children's Schools Wellbeing Bill. That's got enough of the government's attention that then we've been able to work with the DFE, not just ourselves, but also colleagues actually at Cardiff, so the Shern team at Cardiff, and the Born in Bradford team, and all of the teams that are doing similar things to Be Well. We've kind of formed a consortium of sorts to try and lobby and influence the Department for Education and their upcoming pupil experience framework. So it won't look exactly like Be Well or Shern or any of the different models that are out there, but it's almost kind of planting a flag, if you like, that something like this can be made available to schools beyond the regions in which each of those teams work. So that and lots of other examples are available on the Be Well website in terms of our impact. And with that, I think I'm pretty much bang out of time. Sorry, I'm about 4 minutes over, so I will stop sharing there and very happily take any questions that you might have.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks. You actually kept on time, which is great. We want like 15 minutes
Oh, perfect. Okay.
to discuss. So I can see there is a practical question, so I'll start with that. So is there a mechanism for researchers to analyze data for a specific project?
Yes. So we have we have at the moment if colleagues wanted to access it, so at the moment it has to be accessed through our system, through the Manchester. It's in our secure data environment. It's called Isilon. And basically, we have a process whereby colleagues can essentially you become part of the University of Manchester temporarily in order to access the data. We have a form that people can fill in. It goes through various levels of scrutiny, and then potentially that then can lead to uh, access to a pseudonymized copy of the data set in our data environment. It's not a very it's a bit of a bottleneck, which is one of the reasons why we're looking at that longer term solution of like I said, potentially UK LLC or one of the other kind of providers. But yeah, in the short term, if anyone that's interested in accessing the data, in the short term, basically email me and I will put them in touch with our data manager who handles that process of kind of applying to access and use the data.
Yeah, that's great. And there's another question. Are there ways we can support the campaign for national well-being measurement?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that has the time and energy and inclination, we would definitely encourage, probably practically speaking, reaching out to our national director, who's a chap called James Robertson, because he leads on the campaign side of things. So I do all the number crunching. Well, not actually, that's I've misspoken there. I don't do the number crunching. I manage the team that does the number crunching, but James does all the strategic stuff. So anyone that wants to support the Our Wellbeing Our Voice campaign, either get in touch with James Robertson at the university, or actually go on the Our Wellbeing. If you Google Our Wellbeing Our Voice, there's a separate website that has the campaign, and there's information there about how people can help. But any help would be gratefully received. Thank you.
Yeah, so there are not any questions at the moment, so I'm gonna wait for other people to respond. But I was wondering, I have like a lot of questions because, as you know, I'm very interested in the data set. I guess I was wondering because I know you were talking about different areas. So
Mhm.
I was wondering, were there any particular demographic groups or regions where inequality and well-being is more pronounced? Because you're looking at different areas, and on that, is that the data primarily from like urban areas, or is it also from like rural areas across the areas you're looking at?
Sure, sure. So if I take the second part of the question first,
Yeah, sorry,
Fatima.
two
So
questions in
yeah,
there.
yeah, it's okay. So Greater Manchester is very diverse. We have, if I take Manchester, the local authority of Manchester, of the city of Manchester, incredibly like about as urban as it gets, basically, incredibly densely populated, lots of deprivation, very ethnically diverse. Um, but on the outskirts of Greater Manchester. So, I mean, if I take where I am at the moment, so I live, as I said, I'm on the edge of Oldham East. We are on the edge of the countryside. Literally, I go 5 minutes in my car in one direction, and I would be on Saddleworth Moor, which is about as rural as it gets. Um, so the outskirts of the city region are bordering on the rural. If I think about Hampshire, Isle of Wight and Portsmouth and Southampton, Portsmouth and Southampton are, major urban centres. Hampshire is mostly rural. There's towns and stuff dotted around, but there's parts of Hampshire that are incredibly rural. So it's really diverse. And one of the reasons that but demographically, still very different from Greater Manchester. So when we kind of aggregate all of our data up, if I take, for example, ethnicity, Greater Manchester is so ethnically diverse. I think it's somewhere now approaching 40 something percent of young people are belong to a minoritized ethnic group, so non-white British, basically. And then if we contrast that with Hampshire, it's about might be even approaching 80% white British young people. So it's, and anywhere in between, right? So we've got real diversity across those two regions. And similarly, like free school meal eligibility is much higher in Greater Manchester than it is nationally, and it's much lower in Hampshire than it is nationally. So we get the kind of, all that diversity. In terms of the inequalities, we see inequality, we see that the kind of the level of inequality varies significantly quite often by school. If I give you one particular example, we did a piece of work in one of our recent evidence briefings looking at the different inequalities that I mentioned, between young people who are LGBTQ plus and their cisgender heterosexual peers, young people with and without special needs, etc. Between different gender groups, etc., etc. Between kids eligible for free school meals and those not, and so on. And what we found, which I found personally found really interesting, was the analysis that we did enabled us to look at whether the magnitude of those disparities, those inequalities, was uniform across schools or whether it varied by schools. And for most of those different groupings, it was uniform. And so what I mean there is if you've got a gap of this size between kids eligible for free school meals and kids not eligible for free school meals in terms of, say, mental health, that gap looks pretty much the same across almost all of our schools. Where it wasn't uniform was for kids with special educational needs. So when we looked at school belonging, which was one of the key outcomes, generally speaking, what you see is higher levels of school belonging among kids without special educational needs compared to kids with special educational needs. But that the size of that disparity, that inequality, varied significantly by school. And what that tells us then is there are some schools where the gap is wider and some schools where the gap is significantly smaller. And so one of the kind of key things then that we're trying to understand now is where the gap is less, where you've got essentially little or no difference in school belonging between young people with and without special educational needs. What is it that's driving that? What's happening? Is it something to do with other differences in the pupil population? Is it something to do with what those schools are doing differently? What is it that means that well-established gap that we see on average is reduced in one school compared to another? So it's not just about being able to sort of show, well, there's this gap between these groups and it's unfair. It's about then being able to actually say, well, what can we do about that? How can we use the data to try and find examples of good practice? For example, what are some schools doing that's meaning that the young people feel better supported and more connected to school?
Yeah, okay. That's very interesting. We have a more like future directed question. So, where do you see we will developing in the future?
Really good question. It all depends on, I mean, we've got lots of plates spinning at the moment. So with the conversation that I mentioned, that ourselves and Shern and Born in Bradford and the Oxwell team, all that kind of consortium of teams that are doing work that's very similar to Be Well, are in conversation with the DFE about their pupil experience framework. And so that's one future direction, is whatever the DFE ends up recommending schools do will determine how things go. But we have a funding application in at the moment, because one of the kind of things that keeps me up at night a little bit is, we're not funded permanently, because I mean, who is, right? But we're funded at the moment up until the end of this calendar year. We have a funding application in with one of our major funders at the moment to take us through to 2030. And should that funding application be successful, so we'll find that out in about actually 2 weeks today, possibly. If that's successful, that's then going to be about further expansion, but with a much more sustainable model. So at the moment, in the two regions that we work in Greater Manchester and in Hips, all of the kind of survey infrastructure and the number crunching happens within the university team. And that's never sustainable in the long run, because we're always dependent on funding that we keep having to apply for and we might not get, and so on. So when we expand to probably going to expand to another between 3 and 5 local authorities in this third phase if we get it. But that's going to then be about how do you provide a model that then is more embedded within a given local authority. Because each local authority in the country has some kind of data team. They have people essentially with expertise that could be brought to bear, where ultimately then a local authority might be able to run its own version. It wouldn't look necessarily exactly like the current Be Well model, but it would be more sustainable in the long run, because they wouldn't be dependent on, like all researchers are, applying for funding constantly where there's a really low success rate. So it's then so the next phase would be about sort of expansion, but then also creating a much more sustainable long-term model, because we don't plan to keep applying for funding. So if we get this next phase of funding for our third phase, we're planning for that to be the final phase, and then it's going to be about sustainability and kind of legacy, and hopefully then you've got something that is being used up and down the country in different kind of forms, but that is, that kind of general model of generating data on these different things that are important to young people to feed back into the system so that there's an evidence base to inform provision and improve young people's lives.
Yeah, that sounds great. There's another question. So, what has been the feedback on the findings around social media and mental health that you mentioned? And what is your overall sense of where the evidence is in that area?
I think the feedback was generally, like in the media, was lots of surprise, but that feeling of surprise didn't surprise me, if that makes sense, because one of the challenges in this space is the popular media have fanned the flames of this kind of moral panic around social media and young people's well-being. And if you actually look at the evidence base, um, the really good evidence doesn't actually paint anywhere near as negative a picture as we see in the kind of news headlines. Some colleagues of ours at the university, Matthias Pierce and others, did a big piece of work for the Youth Futures Foundation that was published last summer that was looking at all kinds of different things that might be drivers of the kind of youth mental health crisis, including but not limited to social media. They reviewed all the evidence that was available. They looked at how robust it was, how consistent it was, and so on. And for social media use, their conclusion was small effects and inconsistent and generally quite flawed research. So, my view of the kind of evidence base is it's skewed significantly by the popular media. That's not to say there isn't risk of harm. Of course, there's risk of harm. There's risk of, young people being exposed to harmful content. It's not that it's without risk. It's just that, if you think about what's being proposed at the moment, which is a social media ban, as has been implemented in Australia, that's very much throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So, my kind of personal view as a researcher in the space is, there are risks and benefits to this new technology. And what we need to do, rather than just kind of banning it and having a cliff edge when young people reach 16, is to have, make the social media companies more accountable, much more accountable, to reduce the levels of risk for young people, so that they can then safely access the benefits, the kind of sense of connection, promoting creativity, all the kinds of benefits that young people tell us are important aspects of their social media experience. So finding a way to do it without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And then the other thing I just think about the social media ban side of things is, if you look at, again, what's happening in Australia, Australia is a great kind of experiment in the sense of, like, we can kind of observe and see what happens. And already there are concerns around the fact that it's been described as whack-a-mole. So, that kind of game where you whack and then it comes up, because the ban only covers certain platforms. And what then happens is young people migrate to platforms that aren't covered by the ban. New platforms emerge. So it's kind of the policy is constantly 3 steps behind the technology. And again, it shows why just having a blanket ban is probably not the best idea. So I would be much more in favour of something that's about, building on the legislation that we already have, which has been about, what are the things that we can do to keep young people safe, but also allow them to experience the benefits of the online world and social media.
Yeah, I'm looking at the time and I don't want to go over. Just want to finish. There are a couple of more questions, but I want to finish with a comment that we had, saying that your work, including the widget symbol survey with young people with additional educational needs, is very impressive. So
Thank
I think
you.
we can close with that very nice and positive comment. And again, thank you, everyone, for joining in, and for you, Neil, to present and answering all these questions. And I did share in the chat about our mailing list, and the links where you can visit our YouTube channel. Apologize if you can hear background noise. But yeah, so thank you everyone for joining and for your presentation, and I think we can close with that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you. Bye bye.